and then your screen will still be shared. And now it's recording. So it'll record your face and our face. Yep. There you go.
Let me screen
Sorry about
share.
that.
I see.
Yep.
So I'm still going to screen
share. So you're recording now.
Page. Hopefully you guys edit some of this.
We can see your screen now, just so you know.
Great. Everything's just
good.
a little bit laggier because it's sharing twice, I guess.
Yeah. Sorry about that.
All good. Let's give people a few minutes. Welcome, everyone. We'll just give it a few minutes before I get started. This is the Ethereum Tactical Hackathon Workshop. It's a lot of resources, and I'll help both technical and non-technical get started. So tell your friends. If you're already in a hackathon team, probably a good strategy to have each participant go to different breakout sessions and then come back together at the end to gather resources. Mine will be specific about Ethereum development, and then towards the end, I'll just talk about DeFi and the interesting things that are happening there. So let's give it a few minutes. Okay, one more minute and I'll get started. We are being recorded, so you can watch this over again at a later time and share with your colleagues, peers, friends. Okay, I'm going to get started. Welcome, everyone. My name is Clemens, and today I'm going to talk about essentially an Ethereum Tactical Hackathon Workshop. I've been in quite a few hackathons, and I know a lot of people are choosing across multiple platforms. There's a lot of resources out there, especially for Ethereum, because it's been around for 5 years, and people have been building on top of it for a long time. There's other workshops that will do kind of setup screens, but I think I'll just point you to as many resources as possible and let people read in their free time. So just a brief background about myself. I am a solution architect for ConsenSys. And so if you imagine the view of an architect versus kind of the builder, I am designing a lot of different systems for enterprises and enterprise integration. I've been at ConsenSys for 2.5 years, building on multiple enterprise projects. Before that, I was with R3, where I helped first form the consortium of financial institutions and then build out Corda and Corda enterprise features. Before that, I was with Credit Suisse, where I spent 6 years building trading applications. During that time, caught the Bitcoin blockchain bug, started a new career, and I've been in, I guess, more time in the blockchain space or equal time in the blockchain space as I have been in finance. So a lot of fun stuff happening. As I mentioned in the beginning, the goals for this, if you're a tech person, I want you to get comfortable with your setup, give you as many examples of dApps and live code as possible. Hopefully you'll join our ConsenSys Discord. We'll answer questions for you. I'm on there and you can speak with me on there. For the non-tech folks, I'm going to give you some inspirations from different hackathons that you might be able to look back on, copy some of those design patterns, as well as look at some of the different enterprise use case examples that we've built and live in production today. For those who don't know ConsenSys, this is my one ConsenSys specific slide, but if you've ever built on Ethereum, you've built with ConsenSys. We started around the same time as Ethereum launched back in 2014, 2015, and it's founded by Joseph Lubin, who is a co-founder of Ethereum. Our ConsenSys suite includes some household names that you might have heard of and might use daily. So MetaMask on the right, it has over 1 million monthly active users. We have Truffle, which you'll probably use for kind of default source control and testing with a Ganache local client. We have Diligence, which we've done hundreds of audits for. Infura, which is an endpoint for developers. We process about 1 billion calls a day, and it runs quite a bit of backup infrastructure for the major institutions out there. We have a set of suites called Codefi, which we've done using digital asset tokenization. I'll go through some of this later, as well as Quorum, which we acquired from JP Morgan when they were building out these permission networks. So key takeaways for today. First, you have a lot of choices of multiple platforms. Hopefully you choose Ethereum. I will share this full deck. I've already shared it with Catherine and the full team, so you can get a copy of it. Don't worry about taking notes. There is a hackathon survival guide that we've written within ConsenSys because we've done a lot of hackathons and we know how to be successful in them and to get the most out of them. So get inspired from previous winners. Definitely join our Discord, speak with us if you have any questions. There's a lot of open tools out there. So I'll talk about Ethe Build, which is something built by Austin Griffith, which I think is a great visualization of some of the patterns. For more advanced, if you know React.js, you can also use Scaffold ETH, which allows you to spin up a front end as well as a test back end and be able to get started with kind of a pre-made scaffold. So it's great bootstrapping. Also, we'll get to more advanced guides if you want to use Truffle and Codefi Orchestrate, if you want to create something more advanced with Quorum and create some Quorum networks. Not really necessary. Seems to make you focus a lot more on DevOps than on actually building the application. So I would recommend doing less of the deployment and more of the ideation of the business problem you're solving. And then towards the end, there's some advanced topics. I'll talk about enterprise Ethereum use cases and design patterns, as well as decentralized finance, because it is quite a hot topic. So agenda for today, I'll start off with why Ethereum and where to get started. And then for the tech team, a brief overview of some ConsenSys products that might help with that. For the non-tech team, go into design patterns and use cases. And then finally, a special topic on DeFi. Great. So why Ethereum? I've been, a longtime lover of Ethereum, not just because of the store value and kind of the price of Ethereum. I think a lot of people focus too much on price and too much on cryptocurrency valuations and predictions and investments. I'm more of a builder, so we care about the community, we care about the capabilities, the research, the amount of use cases that can fit on top of it, and kind of the advancement of this in a decentralized way. There is no vendor lock-in with Ethereum. There's plenty of people building on top of it. There's plenty of developers and plenty of examples. So I personally have developed my own dApps, have developed my own coins. There's a Clem coin out there as well. But I highly recommend looking into this live application chain that you can deploy onto. Just to clarify, there are some differences between public and permissioned implementations. So kind of the public space is anybody can run a node, can access transactions. There's this transparency and openness to it. But because it's public and it is a commitment chain of some sort, right? Computers are just sending new blocks and kind of agreeing on the new state of this global database. There's a bunch of programmability built on top of it, but therefore it has to be a little bit slower. There are some fees associated to it. And so the early days of enterprise development was to create a permission network. So this is very similar to an intranet, right? So when you think of an intranet, it is a subset space for a subset of users with a lot more granular firewalls that you can put into place, which means that you can upgrade your performance and kind of have more control on the participants. So Ethereum has been growing quite a bit. It's gotten attention from a lot of people. There's almost max utilization now. This is a quote from the CFTC commissioner saying that he's just impressed because it is an impressive technology. It has been live for almost 6 years now and battle tested, and people say that the platform's being hacked. I don't think that's true. I think there are people hacking each other through social means and maybe through smart contract bugs, but the platform itself, as kind of this growing global computer, works as designed. So just a brief history, because I think this is useful context. The early days of Ethereum launched on July 30th in 2015. Really peak price, you'll see December 2017, caused by these decentralized autonomous organizations, or DAOs, and also because of initial coin offerings, basically the ICO boom that you might have heard of. The ERC20 standard, so ERC20 is kind of this standard fungible token contract that has a lot of similar functionalities that you can call, just kind of gives the basic concept of a DAO. And it's been used by multiple projects, still used by today as a way to fundraise for their platforms. So the reason why the ICO boom was so interesting to most people is people thought of it as almost like a VC token that they would buy into. And then once they're in the VC universe, they can spread their token out into different projects and see the pump and dump schemes for each of them. So, that's usually because of hype, because of maturity of the product. And that's kind of the interesting part too, because there are Ponzi schemes and it is dangerous. And I'm not, none of what I'm going to talk about today is investment advice. I just believe in building on top of the ecosystem. So, unregulated markets led to more regulated markets and more maturity. So this was back in 2015, 2016, 2017. As we advanced during the time when there was crypto winter, which was, the price dropping to some points close to 80 to 90% from the all-time highs, the new phase became, let's go heads down and build. So security tokens came out, which was following regulations, able to control more and match the security regulations. The biggest problem with ICOs is that you would do a launch and then you would sell it to one party and then start to go into different types of networks and resell it in the secondary market where it shouldn't be sold. So if you know about regular security law, there are different types of private market launches that you have to be an accredited investor within the US to do so. And if you're not an accredited investor and you don't receive the right types of IRS forms to be filled out, like W-9 forms, then you essentially get into trouble. You're essentially committing some level of fraud. So from here, this was also an era launching DEXs, or decentralized exchanges. And this is a little bit before kind of the term DeFi became popular. But essentially, instead of having a centralized exchange like Coinbase or Gemini that you might use to buy your tokens, decentralized exchanges are full, liquidity pools that allow you to trade and swap. And this is before everything was popular, where you can just use MetaMask and swap directly, or use 1inch or Uniswap. So it was really the early days, and it has evolved quite a bit. So I would say now we're kind of in this phase where I think the recovery is clear, and there's a path that's a little bit disconnected from traditional financial markets. The versions of stablecoins have advanced, so not just single collateral, but now multi-collateral DAI, or kind of these stablecoin of value. And there's also improved layer 2 capabilities for scalability. There's usage of zero-knowledge proofs, which you can just think about a public layer of privacy that can be applied, and also ETH2 phase 0 launch. So ETH2 is the advanced next steps kind of future vision of Ethereum, where now there is a beacon chain that has quite a bit of ETH locked in there, which will move from proof of work to proof of stake. And none of this is really important to the hackathon, but I think it's important to note that Ethereum continues to grow in terms of adoption, but also in terms of kind of technical growth as well. What does the full ecosystem look like? It's not your regular, fintech startup ecosystem. I think the universe here has a lot of distributed communities that are exploring different corners of the technology map. And you can find all of these as resources later on as you're kind of doing your research. This is just kind of to sneak in here, because a lot of people will say, well, don't build on Ethereum because the privacy, permissioning, and performance has issues, or because gas costs are too high, or because the tech has security risks. And there's a lot of aspects of this. There are mitigations to these that we've been working on and has been advanced across the entire Ethereum ecosystem and community. So I mentioned permission networks as kind of the first step, but then there's layer 2 scaling, there's zero knowledge proof advancements, there's layer 2 meta transactions, there's gas cost reductions in some ways. I mean, EIP 1559, it's an Ethereum proposal that hopefully will pass by the summer. That doesn't necessarily reduce the cost of gas, but it will be a significant change of kind of minor incentives, more or less. There's just a lot of work that is done, and if you start research down this road, and I've been in the space for 5 years, following Ethereum since the beginning, and I'm learning new things every day, and it's become almost a holy obsession of following the latest technologies, following the latest teams, attending conferences, and kind of meeting the people who are building these new tokens, but also building these new protocol visions. Okay, so where do you get started? There's a lot of links embedded here. As I mentioned before, I'm going to share this presentation with you if it hasn't already been shared. If you're a developer getting started, I highly recommend to join our Discord to look at the Biddle network, which is kind of the 50,000 or so graduates of our ConsenSys Academy that has fed into this network of people just talking about dApps that they're building. There's a bunch of webinars that we've launched within ConsenSys. There's a knowledge base that's fairly extensive. And what I'm going to do is walk through some of these resources. So the first one is called the Ultimate Ethereum Hackathon Survival Guide with a source link here. If I can do this live, you'll see on my screen over here. That has tons of great content. So what to expect, what it takes to win, tools and knowledge bases that you should bookmark, some pre-hackathon things that you should set up. So how to run Ethereum on your local machine, how to, get testnet ETH if you're going to, use testnet, how to connect your front end to your back end, all of these pro tips that we've built and are sharing with you. So feel free to look through this, and I don't think it's a very long list, but I think it's fairly extensive for you guys to get started. So within that space, there is one section that I think is super important, the what it takes to win. So within what it takes to win, there is a link to a lot of different hackathons from the past, and some of these might be from 2019, but you can see some 2020 ones that have occurred. I have a few of my own resources. You can look at the Ethereum block hackathon winners, as well as Road to DevCon hackathon winners. I would say a good thing to do, and this is probably on my next slide because there we go. Another source for this would be through Git Coin. Git Coin is essentially a site that allows you to fund open source projects. So you can create a bounty for parties to complete different tasks, and you'll make money in ETH or DAI, however you want to make money off of completing these tasks. And the hackathon, Git Coin hackathon guide has a lot of different tools here. So under hackathons, you can find a lot of completed hackathons here. So feel free to look through these, see the projects themselves, see what those projects and which teams won. You'll notice that a lot of the teams that won have actually launched live and have been live for a year. So it's also a good place to see a lot of seed companies coming through. So a lot of resources here that you can just search through multiple hackathons. Great. This is another specific one. So within Market Make, if you click into Market Make, just another hole of looking at more hackathons. You can see different types of coins that people have created. This one's Whiskey Coin. You can look at their demo video. You can look at their source code. Most hackathons open source most of their code. So you're not starting from scratch here. You can look at all of these and get inspired for sure. Even Aave, where it first started, people are building on top of Aave, and you can use different types of resources there. This is how most people get started as a developer. There is a consensus.net/developers page, and there's a 3-step guide where you will send your first transaction. This is probably covered in one of the running sessions by one of your professors, but essentially you can create your first transaction, create a smart contract, and then launch a dApp. Use it with Infura, use it with different types of front ends, but this getting started DevOps is probably something that you should walk through if you want to use Ethereum. Okay. As my computer struggles and continues to load, there is another guide here that I think is super important, is how to organize a hackathon team. And so the topics that are included here include the pre-hackathon prep. This is from one of our developer relations guys, Anthony Albertorio. He essentially attends a lot of hackathons, and I think this is a useful guide to walk through how you can prepare for this, but also how you can make it successful. So for example, learning new skills, meeting new people, The main three things that people probably have issues with is finding a team, finding and agreeing upon your compelling problem to solve, and then also finishing the project on time. So I think following this and doing a little bit of preparation, I think you guys have a month for this challenge. So hopefully you'll get something that you can start building on top of, where the dev team start with DevOps for the first week, while the business team starts thinking about the business problem they want to solve. And you can do this in parallel, try to project manage yourselves throughout this journey. I don't know why it keeps on. Oh, it's because I click a link when I do it. This next slide is Solidity by example. So if you want to learn to code in Solidity, you actually don't have to write too many smart contracts. You can look at the smart contracts that are available, and you can use this to learn each of these. I mean, there's obviously a lot to learn if you want to go through kind of the life cycle of most contracts, but there's also applications here. So it shows you a multi-sig wallet if you want to use that. It shows you how to use an ERC20, how to create a minimal proxy contract. So all of this might seem like gibberish to you, but these are more advanced use cases on top of just building, Hello World or ERC20 applications. Great. And I don't know why it's not loading. Oh, it is loading. It's just loading much more slowly. Okay. The other thing you can do, and this is what I sometimes even do, is look at the smart contracts on Etherscan. So for those who don't know, this is a blockchain. So you can have a blockchain explorer. The blockchain explorer is a centralized entity. Etherscan is a set of developers, actually fairly lightweight. And what they do is they run full nodes, and they allow you to map in some of the applications that have been published. So if you want to look at any live application today that you see is interesting, like CryptoKitties, you can click into CryptoKitties. It'll give you a brief description about what CryptoKitties does, what the contracts are. You can actually interact with the contracts, which is super interesting. It shows you the inventory. And so sorry, my machine is running way too many things. But if you look at the contract code itself, so this is CryptoKitties as created as a front end from Etherscan, but it does show this transaction address, which is the contract. And you can, as Blockchain Explorer notes, you can explore the different transactions. And so this contract has been published on chain. It has quite a bit of ETH in it, even though it's pretty old and somehow still working. And within here, on the top over here, you can see the transactions that have called this smart contract, but you can also specifically look at the contract code. So all of this check mark means the contract code has been verified. And you can see exactly the code that's being used for the source of what's been published. So really powerful here. You can even see what the interactions are. And so, the back-end development for a lot of this may need some tweaking, but likely you can copy and paste a lot of it. It's kind of like the early days of mashups with APIs. You don't really need to build a fresh front end with, HTML and CSS. You kind of have a lot of this pre-built. I think about Solidity contract coding very similar to writing stored procedures within databases. I don't know if people are learning SQL in any way, but essentially those stored procedures are making very specific business logic queries. This is doing something similar, but also has some writes in there. And you can also look at some interesting options, like they have Solidity to UML, so you can view the UML interactions between all the functional calls as this slowly loads. And it's just another way to look at this. So you can imagine, and they have this as a function across all of their different contracts out there, right? So you can really dive into what it takes to build a live application. CryptoKitties you think is, it's just a non-fungible token. But then when you think about it, I have to run an auction. Everything's on chain. I have inherited different types of functions here. There's different public and private functions that are accessible. They have breeding that's accessible for CryptoKitties. So all of this is open source, right? And this is kind of one of the powers of Ethereum, is that all smart contracts are open source because they have to be. It's kind of part of the licensing that they have. If you create your own set of contracts, you must also create a link to the code that you're using and that people are running in the public. Cool. So there's a lot there that you can do, obviously. If you want to look at a separate tool that I think is also pretty cool for visualizing this, there is a talk from Austin, again, who's the inventor of this tool at ETH Denver. And this is called Ethe.Build. And essentially it is a kind of a set of widgets where you can load and drag and drop between. So if you want to see how key pairs work, and this is just, a specific concept, you can open up his kind of pre-made template. And here it'll show different components that you can use, drag and drop, kind of like Scratch if you think about how coding has been simplified. This is not to test code, although you can pretty much drop a smart contract in here, but it is to more or less educate people on how this works. And maybe my memory is crashing because I'm doing too many things. So this is Ethe.Build, and here you'll see each of these little widgets, these little modules represent different functions, right? So you can click a button and it'll generate a key pair, and then that key pair, and if you follow all these dots, will show you the progress of all of these along the way. So you can change your text with what you use for signing or what you use for encryption, and then it'll create a new string off of that. So super useful for sharing some of these encryption, decryption concepts. I think it's a good teaching tool for most people. I think I'm doing well on time, which is great. And another useful tool, and this is if you're familiar with React.js, and again, watch Austin's talk because he'll walk through Ethe.Build first and then walk through scaffold-eth, which has a lot of examples. So even if you don't take anything away, use scaffold.eth. I've personally used it before. It's easy to compile if you have it set up. Just use yarn for install and for creation. And then once you deploy it, you essentially have a base scaffold ETH application with the front end embedded that uses MetaMask. So no need to reinvent the wheel and build this stuff. You'll get all of this kind of out of the box. You'll even have a local faucet to fund your account and then view the different contracts that are being published. So again, if you don't know what I'm talking about, just try to look through this and try to dig deep by experimenting, by loading this up and seeing what you can build technologically on top of it. Okay, so for the tech team, there are some ConsenSys products that you're more than happy to use if you don't want to use the open source modules out there. And I'll try to go through these pretty quickly because I think it's less interesting, but I think it is good to know where development has led towards. So as mentioned before, ConsenSys has been around for a pretty long time. So in the past 6 years, we've been learning from all of our enterprise deployments and from all those features that we've just built for live applications. We have, sorry, this is a little bit slow on the loading side. We have done a lot of enterprise integrations. We have acquired platforms. We have, live systems that are running on Ethereum today. We have partners with all the major firms as well as clients that continue to grow. Our tech stack is essentially made to help with any type of digital asset end-to-end use case. So if you think about digital assets, you'll probably need a set of APIs and front ends We have APIs across the board for it. If you think about developer tools, we cover the developer experience for any user. MetaMask, which everyone uses and it's public, and there's a mobile version of it. If you're a developer and you want to access mainnet, we have subscriptions that allow you to send transactions without running your own nodes. As well as if you want to create a permission network, we have all of the tools that you need for wallet management, for scaling your infrastructure. And so it's been a fun journey to get here, right? You don't start off by just saying, let me build an end-to-end platform. But after 5 years of innovation and iteration, we've come up with this framework. More information about Quorum, which I don't think is too important here. And just to kind of give you a note that Quorum has privacy features, has features needed for enterprise development. I don't think it's as relevant for parties building here. The reason why I think it is attractive is it allows enterprise parties to connect the permissioned world with the public world. So permission networks, as I mentioned, are intranets. So the data that's created is pretty much only shared by the parties running the nodes in that network. And I would say that the permission network is really, really tough. It's like starting a new social network online in kind of the Web 2 world. Let's say I made my clone of Facebook. My clone of Facebook would be okay, I guess, but then I have to look for users. And so you can make as many permission networks as you want, but it's only as powerful as your users on top of that marketplace or on top of that platform. So there is the goal of connecting permission networks and the value you create within them into public networks, where you have crypto infrastructure. So this market infrastructure means you have Coinbase and Gemini and Binance creating liquidity pairs, right? Creating these FX pairs between cryptocurrencies, and then also accessing their networks, which are pretty big, right? Because they're exchanges. And so tools that we've built, and this is part of the journey, right? When we first started, people were like, we'll just run everything on mainnet. But then there are all these enterprise requirements that have to be related to the existing systems that they have and the privacy that they'd like to see. And so public networks weren't built for the privacy requirements at first, but now they've advanced quite a bit. But in the meantime, there was a lot of building in parallel. And so through that evolution, you have fairly large companies building on top of these clients and on top of these nodes and platforms. And there's adoption here, right? There's the ability to extend it. So it's not just creation of the network, but then you can add on the enterprise stack set of modules that you can then deploy. And so these modules could be ideas of different hackathon things you want to build or build on top of. You're able to create assets, pretty much any type of universal token you can create. We have anchoring of data through workflow. We have a compliance check, which essentially you enter in your Ethereum address and it looks to see if it interacts with any other known Ethereum address to make sure you're not, siphoning money between different accounts. There's a payments network where we're highly involved in central bank digital currencies and experimentation in that space. There's also a set of market data and a swapping set of contracts that we've embedded into kind of this overall suite. And then there's scaling technology within Orchestrate. So if you do want to get started with Quorum, and maybe this is after the hackathon is done, if you want to explore how to deploy to different enterprises and think about that process, you can get started with kind of these Docker images and Node.js. More information on the Codefi Orchestrate product. As mentioned, I don't think it's fully necessary, but if you start digging deeper and start building, you'll find that there's things that aren't included in the open source world, such as transaction management. So what if your transaction fails? How do you, reverse it? How do you keep your off-chain databases in sync? Separate account management. So if your users don't want to use MetaMask, how do I keep their key management built and accessible? How do I build that out? How about faucet management? In these permission networks, the gas costs are zero because you can set it as such. There's also smart contract management. Whatever you deploy has to be managed like any type of package tree. So we've created technology around that, as well as encrypted network messaging between these known parties. So, net, there's just a lot of features that we've built, and this is a paid application at some point, but it is things that people have been building in parallel, and we've just made it into a product. So you don't have to worry about that key storage, the nonce management, the external signing, all of these things. Okay, if you want to, as I mentioned, not recommended during the hackathon because deployment isn't as important, but after you're done, and if you want to talk about deployment into permission networks, you can get started with free trials. There is a walkthrough. You can watch that. And just to kind of clarify, the software development kit, the SDKs that are included, and everything nowadays is just using an SDK, so it's fine. But what this does, it's a business application layer that exposes the blockchain layer, so you don't even need to touch the blockchain piece. Everything just looks like an SDK, and you can build your microservices on top of it. Might be a little advanced, but if you're building something that's sustainable and kind of long lasting, this is the architecture perspective of building, depending on what type of architecture you want. So maybe it's event driven. Usually it's services driven, so you can build microservices. And the Codefi market product suite, more slides about the components and how they use each piece. And so I think this is important to note. Right. There are multiple layers to any type of application. Even when I showed you Etherscan, they have their own Web 2 piece on top of it, right? A Web 2 being just the server rendering your front end. That has less to do with the back end, which is, at the end of the day, this is a smart contract that's placed onto a network that anyone can access and anyone can view. You build these extra layers of components in order to abstract that out. So maybe I don't want my users to run MetaMask, then I will build a component like Codefi Orchestrate to make it, have the user experience like an exchange. Maybe I don't want to deal with this middleware that manages the creation of these tokens, and I just want to see it as a input-output variable or request response. So I create APIs that are centralized that you can own, that calls and runs the different tokens and reads from the tokens that are on chain. Some of this is memory optimization, but this is really the class of when you want to create a production ready environment, you need these different layers. Okay, cool. A bunch of documentation here. Feel free to follow the link and view that documentation. Again, if you're interested, you can create tokens. You can create them on mainnet through Infura. Again, a lot of licenses available here, free for a limited number of transactions that you want to do. There's also permission networks that you can create and ways to issue onto those networks. As I mentioned before, my personal recommendation, even though I would love students to use our tools, and I think you already will be if you're using Ethereum, take a look at this much later on, maybe after your hackathon, revisit it, because some of the things that you might be thinking about, such as issuing tokens or NFTs for sneakers or things like that, have been thought up of. We have tools that can do that for you and can make that pretty simple. If you want to issue a bond, for example, or any type of special purpose vehicle backed by a legal document. We've done that end to end. We've issued, live tokens that represent pieces of real estate that have multiple owners and, large investors. I believe the one that we did with Mata Capital last year is over 330 million of assets. So this is live and it is real. So if you ever think about evolving your hackathon into more mature technology, feel free to reach out to us. So let's jump into the next section. I think I'm pretty good on time. We have, for non-tech, just these design patterns that I think could be fairly inspirational. So some interesting patterns. So the first thing that I think should be clear is the difference between Web 2 and Web 3 is this user-centric view of technology. And so a Web 2 interface, you are using your browser right now. It is loading a set of centrally controlled servers. Maybe it's a music rights registry of some sort. You have a login and password associated to it, and you're just accessing it. Maybe it's a search terminal, so you're pinging a database in the back end. And blockchain explorers are centralized, right? They run full nodes. They run this replicated data. But what's decentralized and what's kind of new about all of this is the idea of the user wallet. So your user wallet essentially is your token ownership. It's your access to dApps. It's this MetaMask sign or whichever wallet you want to use. It represents your key management. And because it's reflecting what's on chain, you're essentially updating some type of data that's on chain and everyone agrees on. So here, the simplifications of this for developers is to create Web3 APIs in such a way that you don't have to worry about managing all of this. Developer APIs and payment wrappers and things that, so in the normal API sense, you would be accessing a single database. Here, you're just accessing highly available data on top of the replicated data. Good. Hopefully that concept comes through. So why are payment companies really nervous about it? It's because when I'm sending transactions between myself to one of the students, maybe for whichever, I just want to send you like my Clem coin, essentially my wallet can directly send a transaction that I sign to an address. And you can, register your addresses through Ethereum namespace, like, ENS or any type of unstoppable domain. And you can not just send it to a random IP address like in DNS, but you can send it to a URL. And so there are versions and equivalents of that technology within the DeFi space. So when people are saying, well, I'm going to send you money through Venmo, or I'm going to pay for something through my credit card, the banks at the end of the day are reconciling it. And there's a lot of ledgers back there to do that type of reconciliation, right, for credit. For DeFi, it is specifically a bearer instrument, which means it's a debit instrument. You can't kind of own this future payment mechanism. You're owning the token and you have your signature on that token address. And when you send it to someone else, you're essentially giving them that token and relinquishing your control of it. So Bitcoin does it the same way. Ethereum does it with accounts instead of unspent transaction output models. But none of that technical piece matters as long as you think of it as I'm sending my transactions to a global computer that isn't controlled by a lot of parties. It's just it's not controlled by one party. It is distributed in nature. So what does this look like in terms of digital currencies? Our traditional world uses bank money payment layers. So you go to a store and you use your credit card and you pay for it through a merchant, right? That merchant has a point of sale machine or has like an online Stripe, or even like an in-person Stripe or Square or whichever payment processor that you want to use. And they allow you to take money out of your account through a credit card balance and put it into the merchant's account. And the settlement and processing has to go through your credit card alliance and then goes through the multiple bank accounts that you might be a part of. So your shopper, you may be shopping and banking with JP Morgan, where the credit card is created. And then the merchant may be, with HSBC, where they have their business bank account. And so in order to reconcile those payments that they made and say like, oh, I have to pay my taxes on these, when they'll probably get forwarded the money ahead of time, but then the merchant and the customer themselves has to repay that. This all goes through a settlement system. And so if you're in finance, you'll hear about clearing and settlement and how it's, T+2, or kind of basically it takes multiple days for these to go through, these claims to go through. And that's because the old settlement system spans quite a bit of different systems. So they do it per day and they do it at different intervals and they batch if needed. And so instead of sending, one transaction for every single piece, they may batch them together and send just to reduce the amount of traffic and the amount of money they need to spend. What does that look like in the digital currency world? Essentially, everyone has an e-wallet, right? You have your phone, you have access to it, and this e-wallet, you have your identity associated to it, but all of your balances are not on your phone. Your balances are on the ledger, and you're able to contact that ledger and unlock it by using your e-wallet, which is transferable. So, I can use multiple computers and be able to access my same MetaMask account as long as I go through my authentication process. So why are payment processors super interested in this? And Visa and MasterCard and PayPal all have cryptocurrency exposure now, I'm sure, or at least have some type of services. Square has gotten into it for getting exposure to this, is because the original view of this is that traditional finance payments through bank accounts is great through your payment provider. But if you use MetaMask, if you use an e-wallet, your consumers would then not only get mobile payments and attraction of just like sending money through each other through Venmo, right? You also get investors that want to buy into different types of investment portfolios. So not just downloading Robinhood and using Robinhood for getting exposure to stocks, but using your MetaMask wallet to also send money between parties. So imagine Robinhood also included identification of peers and ability to send money between them. It gets pretty powerful. It gets to become, the central point of technology is now user-centric rather than company-centric. And so partnerships that we've made across the ecosystem is this idea of, well, how do we build it in such a way that now the programmability is also a part of the message sending? Okay, hopefully that drives home the point of why this technology is super interesting and people have been building on top of it. So with all of this, and these are pitches that we give to enterprises as well, if you think about Ethereum as this global settlement layer and, this immutable ledger that keeps on growing in size, the blocks are being mined. There's a bunch of accounts on it that anyone can start and anyone can start trading on it or just like moving ETH between wallets. The things that need to be built in terms of components for it to be successful is something related to identity, something related to distributed know your customer or KYC, something related to asset tokenization and tracking, something related to real-time settlement. And maybe this is a layer 2 solution, something that is much more scalable for a subset of payments. But the products that you can create on top are smart securities. You can create new wallets. You can create digital trade finance, which we've done, autonomous funds, crypto products, conditional payments. So all of this really looks like digital cash, the same way that people agree on the money that you would send back and forth, right? I give you a dollar bill and you recognize that dollar bill. The merchant does as well. That's kind of socially ingrained. The same thing happens within this digital currency world, is that once it becomes accepted and people say, well, I don't want to spend my Bitcoin because tomorrow it might go to 100,000 or something, then that's kind of the problem, is that the usage, the storage of value is there, but the actual usage of that value is hindered by kind of the speculative nature of cryptocurrency. And so there's stable coins that you can use that keeps that value. But again, most people want the upside of the speculative nature. And you'll see a lot of people that start adopting this will be more interested in building, hopefully, than investing. Because I think the view here is not to say buy all this crypto and then wait for it to so it's your nest egg. I think the view is to understand that the ecosystem has been growing and that this is kind of bleeding edge technology that you can build on top of. Okay, and so here are the use case patterns that most people think about. If you think about just having blockchain as a database, it is kind of a crappy database. It's not fast. It is distributed in some ways, but it's very nuanced because of that user-centric view. You can use it as a static registry. What do I mean by a static registry? So imagine you need to know who owns your house. Well, there are government organizations that hold records that say, well, you are the owner of this deed, you are the owner of this car, your car has this VIN number and it has this license plate, and that's all kept in some database that's owned by the government to give that type of exposure. If I need to do a lookup on your social security number, then it's connected to all the things that you are. And so that static registry can be mimicked in some way. It is just essentially an online view of what you own. And so hopefully it's not you putting all your data personally on chain, because that's not safe. That's not the point. The point is to say, well, if I have an asset and that asset is a car, then maybe that car has a single owner with a lien to a bank that's currently lending you money in order for you to pay off that car and payments. Then all of those payments and all of that ownership can be represented in a single place. Maybe in a pseudonymous way, maybe in a way such that that car isn't owned by anyone else, but it is owned by you. And you can prove that ownership by saying, well, look at this transaction. I'm able to make changes to it because it is my car. And all of this can be updated through a static registry. The layers on top of that is not just who owns which items. Maybe that's also related to stocks, like who are my stakeholders in my stocks. Maybe it's related to smart contracts. So maybe I want to pay out dividends to those stockholders. And so cash equity and trading gets involved here. So you can embed different logic based on the type of asset that you're creating, and that gets pretty powerful. And then finally, in part of record keeping, what I've been doing some research on, and this has been around again for 5 years, maybe the legal concept a little bit more recently, but DocuSign, the ability to remove the paper, wet signatures that you have to do for signing a house, right? Using DocuSign is super powerful and very relevant to kind of the coronavirus times, the post-COVID times. I think legal anchoring here means that you are putting a legal document on chain with reference to your signature in such a way that the document can be ever evolving to the business logic that you put forward. And so more concretely, if you look at how legal documents are executed today, you have to go to a lawyer and you have to go through all these layers of templates of very convoluted legal structures in order to kind of sue someone if you want to sue them. So all of these layers are built purposefully to be convoluted because lawyers make a lot of money. But maybe there are legal templates that cover a lot of these. There's a company called OpenLaw. If you go to openlaw.io, you can take a look at the markup language, which basically embeds the smart contracts. And these contracts could be, I want to pay someone and my payroll with ETH every minute. Or when they prove that they've delivered something, I want to pay them at that time. And so the smart contract itself says it's signed between two parties, and then it can release the payments according to some completion of a task. And so that's how bounties work in Git Coin. That's how it can work with legal backing for changing payments, imagine not getting paid every 2 weeks, but getting paid every hour. And you can do that because it's all fungible, it's all online. So on top of transactions, right? So record keeping is just who owns what and what are the other constructs on top of that. If you take a look at transactions, then this is how do I change ownership? So this is all about secondary market. It's all about payments. It's all about maybe fundraising. So a dynamic registry means that I'm personally sending a transaction to the registry and changing ownership of it. Maybe it's partial, maybe it's full ownership. And it could be fractional ownership, right? Maybe I'm the issuer of my own stocks and I want to give you a subset of those stocks, then you're using a dynamic registry, right? I'm sending you asset ownership. You own 49% of my stock. I still have ultimate ownership, but now you can trade it off with other parties and create a secondary market. In terms of payments and central bank digital currencies, this is super important in terms of cross-border. So if you're just within a region like the US or within your country that creates that currency, it is pretty simple. You can just recreate an ERC20 if you want to. Maybe it won't support all of the tokens that the throughput that you want it to create, but you can create muni bonds that represent municipality fundraising for different types of states as well, or different types of counties. All of this is doable, and all this is very easy to do, I think, in my view. But when you think about cross-border, I need to now send money in USD to my family in Hong Kong or something like that. Hong Kong is a bad example because it's pegged to the dollar, but if there's a floating FX rate, then again, that becomes another layer of negotiation between central banks. And so some of this is, well, the central bank holds a subset of fiat in multiple currencies, and they can do some of those trades. Well, how does that work when all of these are in digital currencies? Well, what happens when they're all on blockchains then? And so there's a lot of technology that we've been building that facilitates that type of cross-border payments. The idea of delivery versus payments, so DVP, is very common within finance and kind of finance buzzwords. The idea is that if I need to buy services from you, if I need to buy the stock from you, that's the delivery of the stock. Usually there's a separate set of technology for the payments, which is the payment leg could be millions of dollars to buy a large share of stock. The delivery versus payment is the entire activity of that trade. So currently how it works is if you go to a trading terminal, you submit trade orders, and those trade orders go to the middle and back office to clear. And then the agent, the person in the middle that takes care of facilitating this delivery versus payment, essentially holds an escrow until your payment arrives. Then we will deliver to you your stocks. And so they are the middleman holding all of this on your behalf and on the customer's behalf. So either as a trader or as a salesperson, you're kind of doing this every day. And the reason why this is slow is, there's always errors involved. Maybe there's errors with reference data or something. Maybe the payments haven't gone through, and maybe there's deals on payments where you want to layer on top of, buying. If you can't afford your full phone, then they'll give you kind of financing on top of your phone. So all of this is just the complexities on top of deal structures. It's not just simple, give me a bag of money and I'll give you the phone on one end. It's gotten a little bit more complex with credit. So delivery versus payment here in the blockchain world is literally me sending ETH to a smart contract, and then that ETH unlocks and changes, ownership of my address and puts it onto a table, into the registry, into that lookup table. And then now I can look up wherever my address is, the amount that I've purchased, and that ETH becomes locked up into the smart contract. So that's kind of simple delivery versus payment, but it was automatic. I didn't need a middleman because I sent the transaction myself, I signed it, and then the smart contract business logic essentially reflected what that transaction did. So no more intermediaries in many ways, but still more intermediaries because there's custody, there's all of these, there's a large amount of money. People want insurance contracts. So you can imagine this becomes a whole new area of innovation because there's new initial conditions. There's a new platform involved. And then finally, fundraising, right? ICO, STOs, IEOs. These are all offerings in different ways for issuers to raise money from investors, and different exchanges want to integrate with them. You want to list your token so that it has a BTC pair of some sort so that it can get some liquidity. You may also want to take your non-Ethereum token and put it onto Ethereum and get a wrapped token. That's what they're called. We did a project with Filecoin where there's wrapped Filecoin, and then you can trade between wrapped Filecoin and Filecoin, and you're able to connect multiple blockchains together. And so that question about interoperability comes true when you're actually specifically looking at assets, specifically looking at assets of value, and the technology around it has been advanced quite a bit. So hash time lock contracts, the ability to trade, all of that is already built in. Great. So what does this all summarize into? If you're thinking about financial product manufacturing, and maybe you are thinking about creating an app that builds a bond or something like that, then think about these properties. So programmable blockchains, which could be public or could be permissioned, they deliver digital authenticity, scarcity, property rights, and value settlement. So it's important to break those down, right? So digital authenticity means that there is only one version of this that you can look up. It's transparent to look up. There's an ID for every transaction that you send. Scarcity means that it is, a limited supply. You can create a market off of supply and demand. And then in terms of property rights, that's really maybe I own this particular token and maybe I can receive payments for those tokens. There are different types of ERCs, so these are just base standards. One just came out for an NFT with a project called Euler Beats, right? It's spelled EULER. Euler is the mathematician, right, that came up with the stochastic model behind this, right? The probability model behind this. Essentially, the change of the ERC. I forgot the name of it, 757. One of the extensions of the 721 token was to add on the ability to pay the original artist on top of the secondary market. So it's a new version of royalties, essentially. So if I've issued my own piece of artwork, then if someone else buys that artwork, usually they buy it for a discounted cost, and they are assuming and investing in you to be a better artist or a famous artist at some point. Then they can sell their painting for whichever value afterwards. So that's fine because you've already made money on the initial piece of artwork. But the secondary market, the original artist doesn't usually see that money. In kind of the Euler Beats method, the royalty program on top of that is that in every secondary market transaction, the original artist receives token value directly. So there's a percent, I believe 8% goes to the original artist, and you can replicate it, right? You can own these tokens, and they're selling for tens of thousands of dollars, which is kind of ridiculous. But this is the market that we live in. So finally, my last slide kind of on design patterns. The blockchain business benefit as it evolves is usually deployed in this way. So usually there is some type of multi-system integration, which means that I want to build this to reduce reconciliation. I want to build this because it is a shared data protocol, right? I want to build it because there's messaging embedded, because there's identity and access already built into this data structure. And so they'll say, I want a single source of truth that looks like this. And this is kind of why everyone says everything is blockchain related, is because it's a database, right? You're storing data that's shared between parties. But if you don't create scarcity, you're kind of missing the point. And if you don't create networks of value, you're also missing the point. You can decommission, right, the old ways of sending comma separated, Excel sheets, right, CSV files. So those files are, if you can believe it, within finance are still being sent back and forth for reporting. So imagine a bunch of Excel sheets just being passed around. That's still the days that we live in. I mean, the amount of processing power that we have on our phones could probably run, hundreds of different trading processing systems that exist in the banks today. And some people call that technical debt because there's a spaghetti string of different applications through the journey of upgrading their systems. That's why there is an architecture group in every single bank that looks at rationalizing their systems every few years. That's also why it's kind of hard to connect new systems to old systems, is because nobody knows where the data comes from. Everything comes down to data. So that's why also big data and kind of the trend of analyzing this data was such a big strategy within financial institutions. People started big data groups, had hired big teams around it, created data lakes, which kind of combined, the fragments of data across multiple systems. And what I want to point out is that blockchain is not a replacement for big data system or even a small data system. It's not just about, multi-system integration. What the next phase of what people usually evolve into is multi-party collaboration. So that's where they add on multiple parties across industries. So maybe I have a supply chain party, maybe I have a factory, maybe I have a car producer factory, and then I have to keep track of that shipment of the car or asset moving from one party to another. And maybe in order to buy that car, I had to use some type of financial instruments. Maybe I'm a buyer of hundreds of cars to the distributor, and so I want to keep track of all these pieces. And so these were the early use cases. The benefits being I'm communicating better between these large parties, right? There's cross-industry collaboration. Maybe the downstream pieces of data are more acceptable. Maybe the parties themselves don't trust each other, so they want that data to be tamper-proof or kind of within the ecosystem. And then finally, I think that the final benefit here, and this is the one that should be top of mind, is tokenization and listing. So once you have this crypto market infrastructure, as I mentioned, it comes from tooling, it comes from using the Ethereum virtual machine, right? Using the business logic, using the tools available. You will then look at the value transfer, which is the whole point here. The digital asset must have value. There must be a marketplace of someone trying to buy and sell it. There must be market makers that make it more liquid, right? If I wanted to sell a piece of artwork and no one knows what the valuation of that artwork is, then you can probably charge whatever you want to. But all of the stock market assets, right, they're more or less traded by bots, traded by people that make the market. So you need that type of maturity in the market in order to create a real tokenization use case. But if you solve all of that, then you can reduce your hosting costs because you're basically leveraging this network and you're publishing your assets onto the network. And then you also have composability with other dev companies that might be building different components on top of it. Okay, so finally, why is there enterprise interest? And so I think I'm doing pretty good on time. I'm only an hour in, which is great. This is what I see as a timeline for what we're calling digital asset singularity. And so I make some comparisons here to different famous characters. So you have the CeFi, which is centralized finance. In my mind, this is not TradeFi or traditional finance. CeFi is the crypto market infrastructure that I'm talking about. So they're centralized exchanges that provide services, but they're tech first, right? They only started 5-10 years ago, and they don't have any technical debt. So they're using centralized cloud solutions. You can think about any of these exchanges. Binance comes to mind. They will start to integrate more and more into the regular world of finance, which means you can get a Coinbase credit card and spend your money on it. There are cash management services on top of it. You can create your own offering and issue it directly onto their platform. You can, get the right broker-dealer licenses in order to connect to it. And so you'll see these big exchanges only becoming bigger. Coinbase just released their S1 super interesting how they list themselves. Feel free to read it in your spare time. But yeah, it is a big company. They will likely release it to Coinbase users and then drive more people onto their platform at the same time. TradeFi, right? So the reason why that's Terminator is because they are underneath all of that skinning that is user experience is actually driven by a machine, right? So the machine first portion of it is tech first. Traditional finance, you have RoboCop because you have a party that, has been injured but still uses the central nervous system of a human and just has augmentation. So because of all of this technology debt, that technical debt that I was talking about, the enterprise world has been afraid, to be honest, of this technology for a long time, from a regulatory perspective, but also just from the disruptive perspective. They are looking at bridging over some traditional assets into this technology, more or less just to maintain their intermediary positions. So if you think about your bank account, right? The fractional banking means that your money is not inside of your bank account. It's being moved and traded somewhere else so that they can make money off of your money. This is not the case with DeFi. I mean, you can park your money into different contracts. You can swap them. You can basically control your own investment portfolio. As these digital asset exchanges like Six Exchange in Switzerland, they have an SDX team that has been developing both a bridging of traditional assets, but also of crypto assets onto their exchange. So they are upgrading their technology in such a way that they can host both, right? So that they can host any type of digital asset and trade it with the legal backing as well. And then all the way on the bottom is the permissionless networks, or otherwise known as mainnet, is like the Borg, because the Borg is not just a single entity, it is the group of entities that run for the single purpose of the community or for the Borg. And so I think the evolution of many types of blockchains, many types of public networks is fairly clear. You can look up the thousands of tokens that exist that represent the underlying asset, and you'll see that the advancements from cryptocurrencies into DeFi means that the smart contract platform, the programmable platform itself, becomes this global computer. And so there is this bridge between centralized finance, traditional finance, and decentralized finance together, which means this is my assertion that this will all just become investment properties that will have different layers around it. But if you put your money in a savings account and they give you interest rate returns, there's tax benefits for that. But essentially, they're taking your money to hopefully get 10 to 15% returns so that their branch or their particular bank makes more money from it. So same thing here with DeFi. There is institutional money in DeFi at the moment. You can see it through MicroStrategy. You can see it through Tesla. It is happening in a very fast way, and I think will likely be driven by these large companies for adoption. Not everyone is going to be coding and directly, accessing their funds through MetaMask like I do, or through different direct protocol tools like I do. But at least the open banking API ecosystem is now extended into the open DeFi ecosystem. You can composably build whatever you want on top of DeFi contracts and leverage the existing design patterns that are out there. And I'll talk about DeFi in a little bit after this. Okay, so what have we built specifically, right? We look at strategic opportunities, and I would say that the first 3 to 4 years building for consortium, building for enterprise use cases was around global trade, because it is cross-industry, because these are old technologies. They use Excel sheets everywhere, and so that's just ripe for disruption. There's also asset management, because these are all digital assets and people want to build on top of that. Then institutional capital markets. So capital markets is just the what we call the funding and buying and selling of different types of assets to kind of prop up the market. If you want to borrow money, you go through capital markets. If you want a bond, anyone that wants to borrow money and be a part of the ecosystem economically goes through capital markets. Then you have payments and money, which is now evolving into different types of ways to represent value and movement of value. The current demand is more towards the right. It used to be, flipped, but as the technology has progressed, as it's become more mainstream, people have looked at central bank digital currencies. People have looked at tokenization of all things, bridging into DeFi liquidity, and how to get their teams up to speed with this technology. So just a flip of where the strategic opportunities have landed and how the company has seen that. Just a few more slides about these opportunities. So this is specific to ConsenSys, but it is the full digital asset value chain. So when you think about a piece of this digital asset can be owned by anyone. It's issued by any party, and then eventually goes to an investor. But in the traditional way, there's usually a lot of asset servicing that occurs in between, right? If I am a company and I want to go public, you'll probably involve a large bank, investment bank that helps you along this journey, is because it's so complex, right? They use their connections, they use the marketing ploy, they go live through this IPO, right? The people that are initially invested probably get a pop, and then it gets spread out through this series of networks that manages exposure to this asset. And so asset trading, asset servicing, asset management, all of these different companies that make a lot of money are kind of in between the value chain to the investor. So you as an investor in the secondary market might be much easier because you just go on Robinhood and click a few buttons. But in the traditional realm, if you want to be in a private market, you have to sign a lot of documents. You have to be KYC'd. You likely put your money with an asset manager that diversifies your portfolio. So it's not exactly a direct buy from the investor, from the issuer. So what does this look like? We call this programmable assets, compressed workflows, and tokenized investment products. And so programmable assets covers your cash payments. It covers the issuance cycle of what's being built. Then your compressed workflows is really just reducing the number of steps it takes and the number of intermediaries. So we have projects that have just reduced reconciliation that see the same representation of that asset. And then finally, the tokenized investment product is really the distribution to the private network. We've built exchanges ourselves. We've built pure on-chain exchanges. We've helped parties issue massive amounts of assets. And we're helping governments, build central bank digital currencies. So all of this comes together in some way. Just to share some of the live enterprise examples, and there's not a lot of logos here, mainly because enterprise is pretty slow. It takes a long time to change process flows. But we have examples, for example, with Coca-Cola, they're launching something with Baseline that allows them to keep track of their Coke products supply chain. So it's fairly large and becoming more mainstream. The hard part here is really getting the right integration with the user experience, because a lot of this still stays back-end. As mentioned, this user-centric view of blockchain and Web3 is not exactly great for centralized companies. So they are just building on top of the tech to integrate it into their system to negotiate, different contracts with more parties in the consortium formation. But the innovation, right? It's like fintech. Fintech doesn't require too much of the negotiation between banks. They're just selling software. I would say here, we're building smart contracts, and startups can build on top of these protocols and primitives and be able to release without any type of, they don't need to. They usually do create separate companies for IP reasons and protection, but you can publish your smart contracts by copying anyone else's code because it is open source. So, and this is the first time where it's like units of value, right? I'm not just creating a widget on my website and then someone's copying my website widget that looks cool because I did some JavaScript. This is, I'm trading like millions of dollars and somehow I created a new token that then can be a security that then can have, real consequences if the wrong people have it. So what do we sell? We sell readiness for these changes. So I mentioned some of these, but essentially stable coins, measure of payment, right? Central bank digital currencies, the creation of digital currencies. On top of that, you have credit card companies, payment providers, payment service providers that have that middleware, and then you have traditional financial, exchanges that will be building new endpoints and new implications of using this technology. And research papers about all of this go back for the past 5-6 years. More and more of them are coming out. It's a good business to be writing about the future view of all this. And maybe it looks like some of the sci-fi. Maybe I have a universal credit system and it's linked to my biometrics and things like that. But how does a traditional bank treat it, right? How do I create my internal testnet? How do I inspire my developers to be innovative inside of my company? How do I build an institutional custody wallet for my retail parties? If I have right now a checking account and a savings account, will I have a CBDC account or a digital dollar account? Maybe. Maybe it is a wallet that's now whitelisted, white labeled by the banks to embed it into their mobile wallet to say that, oh, well, now you have a digital dollar backed by the Fed. So it's different, right? It's a little bit different and it's built on different rails, and therefore commercial banks and any type of financial institution will have to prepare for this. And maybe it's not, next year that all of this will be integrated, but as it becomes more mainstream, it will be something that comes up. So institutions pursue this, specifically digital assets on new rails, because of this model, which is a traditional financial model, has centralized finance, for profit organization, fairly large cost of operations, as well as fairly large cost of operations for working with the central bank, for working with infrastructure, right? So financial market infrastructure like CSDs and Swift that does all the payments. And what this is simplifying are those layers. It's the fundamental architecture is different. And so you ask, what's live now? A lot is live now. It is essentially recreating all the functions that I mentioned throughout this presentation about design patterns. There is stablecoins that represent money. There are institutions that are providing liquidity pools that look a lot like central bank, trade routes, right? The corridor between central banks, that FX is there. It's backed by collateral. So you can imagine, the collateral of printing money within a central bank is actually algorithmically calculated for these live systems. There's commercial banking, there's investment products, there's investment banking for raising funds for companies going public or companies raising funds. There's exchanges, which means I'm logging in to do a secondary market exchange to balance my portfolio. There are brokerages that help with exchanging as well. Insurance companies, payment providers, asset management. So these are kind of the key pillars, and there are DeFi products out there that do all of these activities. Okay, I have half an hour for my next special topic, but before I do that, are there any questions, and can I view questions? I see there is a chat message, but no questions. So I'm going to assume everyone's either super.
I was just gonna add.
Yes, go ahead.
EIP 1559 was approved today.
Hey, that's awesome. I know Tim Bako quite a bit, who's been kind of a big supporter of it. And since it's approved, I think it'll take probably by summer for it to launch. So for those who don't know, EIP 1559 is essentially we are changing the base transaction fee to have a minimum value. So gas is used where you pay for the opcodes that are run in your Ethereum virtual machine. Kind of, so you pay the validators. There is a ordering model in the mempool. So more or less, what you do is you incentivize based on your gas prices what transactions to order. And so these ordering of transactions will now change the incentive model because we're burning that token value for the minimum transaction fee rather than just paying more money so your transactions go through. And so as an output, it's not actually going to reduce the cost of gas. It will change it a little bit. The only way to reduce gas costs for these opcode changes is by scaling, is by reducing the utilization of the network. And so there's also tipping involved with EIP 1559. So if you do want to tip your miners or validators, you can do that too. But super deep topic. I could go on for like an hour about it, but that's kind of the overall people that are building on top of this essentially just know that these proposals come in quite a bit. And big companies are backing them, and big companies are pitching them, and different communities are writing up about these new proposals. And as they get popular and as they get voted on, the governance structure will essentially accept changes to these clients. So this will be a fairly significant change, but it's great that it's gone through. Cool. Any other questions? That was a deep cut question. You got a follower here, which is great. Okay. Is everyone okay with kind of how to get started? And maybe I've thrown way too much at you guys because I've been in the space for so long and kind of this is my life. This is what I like to do. But it's just to say that there's a lot happening in the enterprise space, but also in the public space. And there's a lot of ideas, and feel free to, bounce some of your ideas for your hackathon off. I have helped with, VC pieces as well, like evaluating ideas. And I've probably heard quite a bit. It's kind of, so happy to, happy to give you any additional insight. But if not, I have 30 minutes left, and I'm going to talk a little bit about DeFi in 30 minutes. And this is kind of the intro to it. So any other questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. And again, you will get these slides, so feel free to reuse them for your presentation, I guess. I don't really know where the evaluation is going to be, but maybe there's something in the design patterns that might be interesting for your problem solution business case. Okay, so I've mostly been talking about mainnet. I've talked about the ecosystem, about how enterprises have been using this. I talked about the tools that you can use. And what I want to get into is kind of what's more popular. So it's not just about Ethereum being that static registry for ICOs and whatnot, but you start to see a lot. Even reading about this every day, right, and being passionate about the subject, there's more and more that I learn every day, which is why I love this space. It's just endless amount of innovation that's all open, and it's all changing. It's changing not just because of regulations and it's forcing it to change, but it's changing because these design patterns are just super open and composable, and people are building new structures and experimenting with new things. So when you first get started in DeFi, decentralized finance, you may think about, and so let me just start with like cryptocurrencies, right? That speculative nature of the product uses, incentive mechanisms for holding and then trading and spot trading essentially. If you're in traditional finance world, maybe you're building derivative products that reflect these cryptocurrency prices. Maybe you're getting price feeds. You want to leverage cryptocurrency for payments in a very simple way, where you do live conversions with pools, with exchanges. You can all do that. But the evolution of not just having a single token represent your company and represents future growth and Ponzi schemes of that company, there's all these other things that have been built into the smart contracts. So one would be in the very, very early days, you'll probably read about stablecoins. It's the answer to, well, how do I, make sure that my token doesn't appreciate in value, or I can use it in such a way that I'm not losing value in case there's a crypto winter, which there often is. There's usually a 3-year cycle of crypto winter with a 6-month cycle of crypto boom. So let's see where that goes. But essentially, you'll start with stablecoins. You'll look at Tether or maybe USDC backed by Circle and Coinbase. Right, these are all coins that are backed by real assets, so they're asset backed. And then maybe you'll look at DAI, which has a collateral debt position contract that's super confusing, and I don't know how it works, but it does. It is basically arbed out through bots, and they're able to maintain that dollar value. I have a lot of resources after this that you can read up on, kind of quick and easy guides across all of this. Finematics also does a pretty good job on YouTube. He just does great videos that's kind of explain it like M5 videos. And so just to continue, in the early phases of looking into this, you might look at spot trading. Maybe you're using interfaces like SushiSwap and kind of just buying sushi rolls and whatnot. And then maybe you'll get into lending, so Aave or Compound. And this is where the initial idea of a high value savings account comes into play, right? I need higher interest. Interest rates are pretty high right now, 6% or so for lending. You put in your ETH into these contracts, and then someone on the other side is borrowing the stable value. And then as you go deeper into the rabbit hole, you'll get into asset management, like Set Protocol or UMA or any of these, where your smart contract itself has a subset of tokens and maybe has a token distribution. And so I can buy into an index, right? That asset manager only has to worry about changing of the index, and then the returns will be reflected by that. You can also look at NFTs, non-fungible tokens, the different types of token ownership. Maybe you've seen the latest memes of different artists making tens of thousands of dollars and people going crazy over CryptoPunks and Beeple or whichever. There are marketplaces associated to that. So OpenSea has had NFTs for quite a long time. You can buy them up and sell them in the secondary market. People are just like treating it like eBay and just throwing in junk as much as they can. But there are really talented artists out there that deserve kind of the portfolio that's being created. Then there's also risk management. So you can create contracts that allow you for quite a bit of diversification. Everything looks like staking, and that's kind of the main design pattern. Is I'm putting in my token that has value, and then it is coming back with a new token. So very similar to the ICO realm, but there's this additional business logic that makes it more attractive. So these primitives are growing quite significantly. And then finally, if you get towards the expert front, you'll see derivatives. You can buy Tesla stock as a synthetic on crypto, using crypto, and you'll get Tesla exposure. Hopefully not today or in the past few weeks, since they're down 30%. But anyway, those exist, right? Those type of contracts, maybe they're not as liquid, but they do exist. Then there's yield farming, which could be governance token purchasing, or it could be any type of building on top of diversifying your portfolio. Again, everything looks like staking. Everything looks like putting your money, pooling it, and then lending it out as needed. And then finally, there's new primitives like flash loans, which I'm personally fascinated with, right? You're creating a flash loan is essentially the ability within a single transaction. So the way that these smart contracts work is that you send a transaction and there's events that allow you to trigger other transactions. And therefore you can link together 10 different contracts. And so this is how it also gets hacked, is that people leverage market manipulation and kind of like drain pools with a large amount of money. And so they can kind of change the prices dynamically. But a flash loan, the one that Aave came out with, right, that was hacked. BZX had one that was also hacked. But essentially, it is a new financial product that allows you to borrow money as well as pay it back within a single atomic transaction. Atomic being that all of these, chained smart contract calls have to completely even out with your Aave call. And so as long as you're able to pay back that loan right away, you can borrow money for free. And so something that you can't do in real finance world, right? You can't just go to a bank and say, well, yeah, there's a lot of processes involved. And here it's just a single transaction that was encoded and executed. And also exploited afterwards, right? But still, super interesting stuff. I can go on for a very long time about this. How is it going and why is it interesting? So I also wanted to mention that all of these diagrams and all of these charts are available through either DeFi Pulse or Dune Analytics. And so Dune Analytics is kind of like Tableau on top of all of this public data. And so you can look at trading volumes, you can look at just different dashboards that people have created. This guy made one for, DEXs and to follow different contracts. And yeah, Dune Analytics is great. And if you want to do like some market analysis of who's, using these tools and why you're using certain tools, this is a great place to start. They even list the number of traders, which is super impressive, the depth that they have. And so it's going well. People have been building in the space maybe for 3 years or so. The first few DEXs, like Uniswap, went live in 2018, 2019. So they've only picked up in being locked ETH now, but it's still open greenfield. So a lot of potential for new ideas. People have, and there are out there, DeFi savings accounts where they take your money and they put them into Aave and Compound for interest rate, and then they just give you the interest rate. So the user experience is getting better as well. People are building companies around this. I believe some of these companies that did hackathons back in 2018, 2019 are live now. And so I'm always interested in hackathons because of these new ideas, new problems need to be solved, and new building blocks to build on top of. This time is different, trademarked, I guess. This is kind of a joke also soon, because everyone says, this will be done in 2 weeks, and then it's always a year later. But I think this time it's a little bit different with institutional value coming through. Hopefully more and more projects, and maybe it starts off with just balance sheet people putting Bitcoin on their balance sheet. Maybe the value of companies that are backed by Bitcoin or have some Bitcoin are more stable than others. Who knows? I don't know how that looks, how that works. But if I'm able to buy a Tesla with a Bitcoin, then I probably would do it, right? And if I don't have to incur capital gains tax for it, I'll probably do it. But here are some metrics, right? People look at the type of token, the type of digital asset that's in the space. So you could be company shares, it could be bonds, it could be stable coins, cryptocurrencies that anyone that can create. All of these numbers are off, by the way, because just things are changing so quickly. So go to DeFi market cap or coin market cap for more information. And then on the trading and lending side, these models are super unique because of decentralized exchanges and decentralized lending and really smart contracts that represent teams of middle office people that design these systems and are imagine going through a bank and being able to pretty much not use their IT systems and instead use this new kind of greenfield set of innovation. So another view of kind of the key projects that we've seen growing in popularity. MC stands for market cap, so the number of tokens that are outstanding times kind of the value of that token. Uniswap, all of these, like there's Ethereum is currently trading at higher notional value, as in like the number of transactions value going through Ethereum is higher than Bitcoin at the moment, has been for the past few months. And that's because it's being utilized, right? People are taking their Bitcoin, making it into wrapped Bitcoin so that they can get DeFi exposure. So it's not just digital gold that kind of just sits there. So it becomes this quote unquote digital oil that can be used for distribution across multiple tokens. And this is also one thing that I personally find interesting, right? Disclosure that I have cryptocurrency if it isn't obvious. I like the idea of being able to rebalance my accounts in my own way, right? So if I wanted to buy Filecoin because I want storage in Filecoin, then I can allocate my amounts to do so. It's kind of like, well, if I have AWS credits or kind of like Audible loyalty points, or if I have, some credit card points, or if I have miles from airlines, if I'm able to automatically convert them because I know someone who wants to buy them and I want to convert it to cash, or I want to convert it to Amazon gift cards or whatever it is, I could do so through a marketplace of infrastructure that exists within exchanges, within DEXs, within swapping. And so it's super attractive to me because I can automatically balance my exposure to multiple assets. I can just default into stable coins if I want to have like a stable coin bank account, or I can be more extreme and say I want to risk into gambling into some of these DeFi protocols. I can do that too. So one important structural change, and we've people that have kind of turned on to this technology have looked at it and said, wow, I didn't know this was possible. I can package an entire financial instrument, actively buying assets that are currently not available to regular people right away, just online through linking up your MetaMask account. You can get access to a fund. You can buy DAI directly. And it gets processed. And yes, you paid for the transaction fee, but you didn't pay any middleman. The infrastructure is different, right? If I just buy DAI right now, DAI is the output of MakerDAO, and SAI is kind of the older version of DAI before they moved to multi-collateral DAI and did that migration. But it's there, right? I'm able to invest with the yearly growth with a set amount of whatever, and then it's available. And so it's impressive because these interfaces now become your new financial protocol, right? So the governance is also different. You can buy tokens and governance tokens in order to vote on forums. So if they need to make any big changes, if I'm Aave, I need to start listing a token, and this is all again decentralized, you can do so. You can just pretty much go into the chat rooms, go to the Discord channels and talk to the developers and talk to these groups. And hopefully they don't get too big and hard to manage, but Ethereum still uses EIPs and it still works out pretty well. People present them, people discuss the impacts to the different groups that are involved. It's very democratic. That's kind of the conclusion. There is one distinction because this will probably come up. Think about the difference between an asset and a token that you would buy directly from an exchange versus the locking up of assets into a protocol. And so TVL is total value locked, and that is the calculation of the amount of ETH that you lock into a smart contract. And then that total value is usually a reflection of the multiplication to the kind of the current price of ETH. You're still using ETH, right? You have put in your ETH and it's locked up into that contract. The asset token itself is really the creation of a new stock. You can think of it as a new company almost, and sometimes they do represent companies, and they have value associated to it. So you can trade the spot market of your assets and tokens between each other, and there is a market cap associated with the amount of supply that's out there. I now have 10 minutes. I'm going to go a little bit faster. What I'm trying to say is that DeFi has replicated financial services on a trustless infrastructure, and this is a 2020 diagram showing that growth, but 2021 is even bigger. There's even more companies that are looking at this, and I follow the block, I follow Masari reports, I follow Defiant. There's plenty of newsletters that you can follow to keep up to date with it. I follow Bankless. Tons of reading that you can do, and an endless number of rabbit holes that you can find yourself reading at 2 a.m. But that's why the space is so fun. I did this diagram already. This is the financial layers for the internet that has been discussed. So the settlement layer being part of Ethereum, asset layer also within Ethereum, right? You have, the representation of registries of who owns what in the asset layer. Then within the protocol layer, it's exchanges, lending. These are just different patterns that are represented in your smart contracts. And then you can build dApps on top of it. And then you can build aggregators of those dApps. So 1inch and Uniswap, these are just aggregating pricing across multiple. There's automatic market makers that are involved. There's a lot of complexity here. But all to say that this is actually something that was a diagram that was made by the St. Louis Fed. So it's not just a bunch of people playing around with it. It's getting recognized, and that may mean that regulation is also coming soon, which is good for the ecosystem long term. Maybe not great short term, but I think it's getting more and more mature, and it's warranted a lot of attention. This is my diagram that I drew to represent kind of the layers of value. So at the very bottom, you have ETH as the ability to fuel your running of the global computer, right? The smart contracts, the ability to have underlying value. It's a native asset that's being traded. On top of that, you can create a collateral debt position, which represents the backing real world collateral, any type of cryptocurrency collateral. That's kind of like a treasury pool. And then on top of that, you have a stablecoin, DAI, that you can then borrow and lend. And so your protocols on top of borrow and lending then allow you to build these applications that can't be built in real life. So for example, the example I like to use is a lossless lottery. There's a company called Pool Together that essentially is just a smart contract where you send your money to gamble into a lottery, but it's lossless because it takes a month. They take all of the accumulated money that you put into that lottery smart contract, and they put it into Compound or Aave to gain interest over DAI. And then once the execution of whoever wins the lottery comes out, then that party wins the interest, but everyone gets their money back. So super interesting. Like imagine just kind of betting into a lottery and then maybe winning a bunch of money in interest, but there's no loss, right? I'm not putting in money because the money itself is transparently being relended into multiple pools. Very cool. And so just a few more slides about financial industry, right? All of these companies are disruptive to the traditional way of doing things. Blockbuster had, these VHS and DVDs, and Netflix changed the game through streaming. Spotify had a bunch of CDs, and they changed the game through, again, streaming of data. Uber created marketplaces. Google created indexing of all of the world's knowledge instead of using a card catalog, if you can imagine. And I think finance underneath it all is much faster on Ethereum. is much faster when it's able to be tokenized and when you can do these transactions from the user's perspective and be able to unlock that value. And so our value proposition is building on top of a platform that already has, the entire cryptocurrency market is in the trillions now. So I believe it broke $1 trillion recently. So how does this compare to the early days of the internet and early days of banking? Payments processing, so tech for making payments. WorldPay was a $35 billion company at the time. Now you can send transactions with each other much easier, right? You can use MetaMask and just enter in the party you want to send it to, and that's all built in. Core banking with Jack Henry was $15 billion, and now you have pretty much MakerDAO that does a lot of that for savings and deposits. And then lending and underwriting, Finastra, previously Mysis, who made LoanIQ, which is the main software used for syndicated lending that banks use. They now have quite a few initiatives that they're building out that would be connecting their different software applications, but it's nothing like Compound, right? Being able to raise money and being able to incentivize this distribution on chain. And then wealth management. So InvestNet's early days, right? $4 billion. Now you can manage your crypto portfolio through SET protocol or any of the other ones. Again, NASDAQ back in the day, 20 billion. And now you can use relay networks like Kyber, BZX, all of these different types of liquidity providers that represent decentralized exchanges. And finally, derivatives, so TradeWeb, 12 billion. You have tokens that can represent real life stocks. You can have stocks in different ways, right? There's a whole spectrum of representation of these tokens. And so the final diagram here is really just looking at DeFi adoption from the perspective of different entities. And so your central bank essentially is minting tokens, right? Facilitating bank-to-bank transfers, reconciliations. And so you have G2B is government to bank or business. B2B is obviously business to business. B2C is business to consumer. And then C2C is consumer to consumer. And you have different use cases across this. So a central bank issuing tokens to a bank, and then banks working with each other is a wholesale CBDC or wholesale central bank digital currency. This is essentially being able to reconcile your payments between banks much faster. It doesn't deal with the consumer. It's kind of just reinvention and operationally upgrading that efficiency. A B2C format would be more of a retail central bank digital currency, where I'm trying to incentivize consumers and retail participants to use this token for a different user experience, likely with an e-wallet, but still settle with the KYC that's enabled by banks. So, this, when you merge the existing traditional financial market infrastructure with the crypto financial market infrastructure, you will start to see this intermediary layer of banks still exist for user protection purposes. So not everyone's going to go and just move all their money into DeFi, into managing your own custody of keys and all that good stuff. Likely people will still use banks because they trust them, because there's FDIC insurance, because there's all of these things that protect the investor. And again, not saying this is investment advice at all. This is all kind of crazy, new bleeding edge stuff. So don't invest off of this. I have 2 minutes left, and there is a slide here just for resources. Click the wrong button. There's a lot of reports here. So when you get the slides, feel free to look through these, to look at Token Project, to look at any of these reports. These reports are linked to their PDFs, and you can read those. And then just finally, if you're interested in using Messari or any of the other tools that I mentioned, there's discounts for. I use Messari specifically for staying up to date with research and to looking at the full market cap and what's happening in which regions. Obviously, this is way advanced, but it could be super interesting for anyone here. Okay, I have 1 minute left. I should have left more time for questions, but anyone have questions or ideas, feel free to drop them in the chat or unmute.
Hi, Clemens. I'm just going to say thank you so much for your gift of your time and teaching our participants this valuable content. So I'm just going to say thank you. And I know you have just 1 minute left, but we're starting with our next tech workshops as well. And some of these participants.
Uh-oh. I think she maybe got pulled into the tech workshop. But I have the recording that I will share. Thanks all for listening, and I hope you use Ethereum. Okay, best of luck, everyone.
Thank you so much, Clemens.
Yes, no problem. Should I stop recording and then I will